The Dictionary of Australian Artists Online, or DAAO, I'm just going to call it the DAAO from now on, is a web-based resource for the generation and dissemination of Australian art and design history. The DAAO publishes biographical data, contextual information, and commentary and links to images. Its creation was led by the University of New South Wales in collaboration with a long list of other universities and galleries and libraries as well. And also with the support of two major Australian Research Council infrastructure grants in 2005 and 2007. Since the end of our last ARC grant, the DAAO has been maintained by a collaboration between COFA, the UNSW Library and the University of Sydney. We've just received our third ARC grant, which is going to allow us to really expand the system. And in line with those expansions, we're changing the name to Design and Art of Australia Online. And we've always collected design history information, but we're hoping that the name will reflect the expansion into design. So the DAAO that I'm going to show you tonight, by this time next year, will be a much bigger creature. Key principles of the DAAO are that it's open access, scholarly and dynamic. So far we've managed to avoid the subscription models adopted by other online data repositories, thanks to the support of the collaboration I just mentioned. The content is authoritative and fact-driven rather than being based on critique and opinion. All DAAO content is moderated, and the publishing system incorporates a facility for double-blind peer review. The system is also dynamic and flexible. It allows for addition and amendment to content as history is made and also in some cases revised. The premise of the DAAO is that it combines digital scholarly publishing with a facility to support new research. So biographical entries can be read and cited as unique pieces of research, or they can be assessed as part of a whole matrix of related data. And I'm just going to show you the structure of a biography so you know what I mean by matrix of related data. Each bio has two parts. We have the prose at the top, which is what our authors submit. So this one was submitted by Lola Wilkins from the Australian War Memorial. And then underneath, we have 35 possible fields of metadata. So all of the core information from each biography is mined out into searchable metadata fields. So everything from gender to place and date of birth, the medium that the artists use, artworks, exhibitions, collections that the artist's works held in, where they were trained, associates, the list goes on, family members, etc., where they lived. So all of that is searchable data. We launched the original DAAO in late 2007, but the genesis of the project dates back to the 1970s with the research of Professor Bernard Smith and the late Professor Joan Kerr at the University of Sydney. I never met Joan, but I'm going to talk about her a little bit tonight because the DAAO is quite bound in her legacy. I think it is one of her legacies. Two of Joan's publications, print publications, formed the foundation for the DAAO, both in their philosophy and their content. The Dictionary of Australian Artists, Painters, Sketchers, Photographers and Engravers to 1870, which included over 2,500 Australian artist biographies, and Heritage, the National Women's Art Book, 500 works by 500 Australian women artists from colonial times to 1955. Most of the biographies on heritage in the DAA can now be found on the DAAO. Kerr's approach to art history was an inclusive one. She addressed art history as an analysis of cultural practice, and she included media not commonly incorporated into the canon of art history, such as domestic arts and crafts. The Power Institute recently published A Singular Voice, which was a selection of Kerr's essays on Australian art and architecture. And I've just pulled one excerpt from one of her essays as an example of how she viewed the way art history was made and how it could be reassessed. This is taken from a paper called Art and Life from 1995. Here she's reflecting on her experience planning the structure of heritage. She says, "It became increasingly obvious that it was existing art institutions and other patriarchal structures, not the works themselves, that have made women's artistic productions look like mere appendages to male art. by redefining art as an activity within society, an integral part of everyday life, and not a rarefied activity separated from it. Not only are well-known images transformed, but quite a different range of artist authors are allowed into the pantheon of the past. Along similar lines, in her introduction to the DAA, she says, "The grand panorama of Australian cultural life during the first 100 years of European settlement unfolds in this volume of the DAA. By changing the conventional boundaries of art and examining all known named persons who made a variety of two-dimensional images, a great cast of local artists has been unearthed." So thanks to Joan Kerr and the hundreds of art historians who worked with her on the DAA and Heritage, the DAO now holds biographies of artists from lesser-known hair modellers and China painters to war artists and renowned landscape painters and everything in between. So Stella Bowen is obviously one of our war artists. This came from Heritage. And I'm just going to go back down now to the metadata and show how the DAO links to images. What we've been funded to do in our focus is to collect research on artists' lives. So at the moment the site is very text-based, but we can provide a little bit of visual context by linking through to images in cultural institutions as their collections go online, and a lot of those institutions are partners with the DAO. So I'll pull up the AWM image for this one. In 2003, Joan Kerr was diagnosed with cancer. Joanna Mendelsohn, who is based here at COFA, had persuaded Joan that the only way to give her work a continuing presence was to republish Heritage and the DAA online, and also to publish online her research on Australian black and white artists, which had been rejected as a concept by mainstream publishers. Later that year, Andrew Wells, the UNSW librarian, joined the group, offering critical support of the library and research database know-how. When Kerr realised that her cancer was terminal, she asked COFA's Vivian Johnson to take the role of Editor-in-Chief of the DAO. A lot of you probably already know about Vivian's research, but for those who don't, she's a leading authority in Western Desert artists, and her book, Aboriginal Art of the Western Desert, a biographical dictionary, brought about 500 biographies of Indigenous artists to the foundation data for the DAO. And that was really important for the DAO because it was the first substantial contribution of Indigenous artist biographies to the database. The DAA had included some Indigenous artists' biographies, but this was the first focus group. This is one of Vivian's. There are some nice image links to this one from the National Gallery collection, and the National Gallery is one of our partners. DAO's aim is to take the framework of Joan Kerr's work and collate a record of Australian cultural history that doesn't conceal gaps, doesn't discriminate between an artist's heritage, the media they use, or the success of their career. In short, we're aiming to build a full history of Australian art practice, which is not a small undertaking. We're a long way off, but we're building pace, due in no small part to our collaborative approach. The DAO officially is a very light operation in terms of actual staff, but it's supported by this huge community of researchers, libraries and galleries across Australia and internationally. Keeping the engine moving are hundreds of peer reviewers. These are expert art and design historians who donate their time to the DAO. Also an editorial board of experts from key partner institutions, including the National Gallery, National Library, the State Library of New South Wales, Queensland Art Gallery, Uni Adelaide, UNSW and University of Sydney as well. Of course, then there's the authors. We have about 700 member authors at the moment who give us licence to publish their research on the DAO. Our authors are historians, academics, librarians, commercial and public gallery staff, tertiary students and the artists themselves. So the idea is that anyone that has accurate information on an Australian artist can submit to the DAO. And this inclusive approach democratises the creation of art history because there's no one voice espousing a single truth, but hundreds of voices contributing to history under a set of unifying guidelines. Again, the right is anyone who has accurate information on an Australian artist and can follow the contributor guidelines, which are fairly straightforward. And an artist, we're really inclusive with that. I think for the DAA, the criteria were that an artist had stepped foot on Australian soil once and had created some kind of visual work. Now we say an artist is anyone who has lived in or is from Australia and who considers themselves to be an artist, is considered by their peers to be an artist, and has a body of work. So it's really very inclusive. We have a lot of artists who've just left art school and had maybe one exhibitions, as well as the more well-known artists. So the benefits of publishing this type of research on the web are fairly apparent. Of course, it helps us meet our aim of making the research accessible, but in terms of information gathering, the freedom of publishing online allows the DAAO to meet key challenges. The first challenge is the sheer scale of the project. When you consider how many artists and designers have lived in Australia since European settlement, the task of collecting data on every single one of them is mammoth. The DAAO, the print publication, which covered around about 100 years, took 12 years to put together. At present, we have on the DAAO about 8,000 artist biographies. We think that's quite good, but we might consider the survey relatively comprehensive when we have about 50,000 entries on artists and designers past and present. Publishing online means we have a rolling deadline, which is nice, and we're free to publish when information comes to light. We're free from restrictions such as publishing volumes categorised by media, location, chronology, or even alphabetical order. Attracting new research is also aided by our presence online. Recent Google Analytics figures show that significant visits from 60 countries in the DAAO over the last few months. These are hits long enough for us to assume that they're not bots or just accidental passing through. And we do pretty constantly receive unsolicited but generally credible information from individuals and institutions around Australia and overseas. Many of these people find us through Google searches for particular artists that they're already researching, and then they'll give us their research. Family historians are of course pretty active on the DAAO, and they're very quick to let us know when information about their artist relative is missing from the system. And that's really quite ideal for us if there's someone who wants to take care of one artist's history and make sure that all the facts are absolutely right. We have no limit to the number of authors that we can take, so that's really an ideal situation for us. The second major challenge is the fact that we're not dealing with a static history. So this is an obvious challenge when representing living artists. Continuation of their practice necessitates a flexible approach to telling their story. Styles and artistic concerns change, new works created, new awards won, and new associations made. The DAAO addresses this by supporting the creation of variant biographies and commentary. So as an artist's career develops, new and more up-to-date biographies can be added, and new exhibitions and artworks can be submitted as commentary. In a sense, then, the DAAO allows for collaboration between researchers. So one historian can submit a biography of an artist, and another historian can submit their own research under their own name without overwriting the existing biography. So they're working together on creating a history. This is one of the original biographies from the DAAO, one of Joan Kerr's bios. And down the bottom, you can see one of our authors, Emeritus Professor Rost, has submitted just a couple of additional details on the artist's death date and cited where he got the information from, and also given the artist's parents' names, which we didn't have before. For historical artists, there's also a need for flexibility. There can be varied or conflicting views of a single artist's history. Biographical information could remain buried, in a relative's garage for 50 years. And believe it or not, art historians don't always get it right. The DAAO was built with this in mind, and the system's structure allows for us to publish corrections alongside problematic historical assumptions. One recent example of this was the case of artist Sophia Campbell. Campbell was born in England and came to Australia in 1800. She was considered to be the first woman artist to paint Australian scenes and people. The DAAO held this biography, which was originally published in 1995 and then given to the DAAO. But in 2009, that entry needed to be corrected. I'll read a small piece from the correction to explain why. The correction was submitted by Linda Groom from the National Library of Australia. She writes, "A sketchbook of unsigned drawings titled Sketchbook of Scenes of Sydney, Broken Bay, Newcastle and Region, New South Wales 1817 to 1840, held by the National Library of Australia, was attributed to Sophia Campbell until 2009 on the basis of family tradition and a letter written to Sir John Ferguson. A second sketchbook, held in a private collection in the UK until 2009, had also been attributed to Sophia Campbell. In 2009, both sketchbooks were reattributed to Edward Close, the husband of Sophia Campbell's niece. The trigger for the reattribution was the availability for examination in Australia prior to auction at Sotheby's, Melbourne, in May 2009 of the second sketchbook. So the entire premise of Campbell's status as an artist had been based on these sketchbooks. And rather than removing her from the DAAO because she wasn't considered an artist anymore, and removing her from art history in a sense, we published a parallel contemporary account of the entry, clearly outlining how the reattribution came about. So I'll just show you how the corrections are linked through. So this is the original version that says Campbell's an artist. And here we have the link to the correction, a peer-reviewed biography by Linda Groom. And I think we can also link through to the image of the sketchbook that caused all the problems. If we just scroll down here to her family members, we'll find Edward Close. We can link through to his bio and should be able to find, there we go. So we have listed the reattributed sketchbook in the National Library Digital Pictures collection. The National Library are another partner of ours. And I think we can go and see the whole sketchbook as well. So overall, our experience of publishing this kind of research online has been positive. The only real issue so far has been occasionally running into the prejudice that if it's on the web, it's not authoritative. I think that's changing. We're not running into that so much anymore, and I think that has a lot to do with the institutions and academics that are supporting the DAAO, and the credibility that they hold helps us. We also had to explain a little bit in the early days that just because we had user-generated content didn't mean that we were Wikipedia. There's a lot of differences between Wiki and the DAAO. Wiki's authors are anonymous and one entry can be continually altered, which serves their purpose, but that's not what the DAAO was created for. DAAO authors are clearly referenced and can't alter each other's work. Scholarly citation is possible because each new version of an entry has its own constant URL. In addition, all DAAO content is moderated by expert peer reviewers, board members, and/or editorial staff. So how is the DAAO supporting new research? The first major example of this is the Storylines project, an ARC discovery project, which, as Ian said, contributed 600 biographies to the DAAO and then used the system metadata to assess their findings. But briefly, from the DAO's point of view, Storylines was a model for possible future research. It shows how the DAAO can be used to scrutinise bodies of data. Because each DAAO entry is mined out into 35 metadata topics, as I showed earlier, researchers could use the system to look at, for example, concentrations of artists with different heritage, say German heritage, or examine whether tertiary training has an impact on the eventual success of an artist's career, or to study trends in the use of video as a medium. So bringing together disparate disciplines into one flexible and searchable repository provides a basis for researchers working across a range of concerns. At present, researchers can undertake advanced searches across all of our schema. So, for example, if you did want to look at video art, all the metadata has been mined out here. You could look for medium video, and then perhaps refine your search to Sydney, artists living in Sydney. Here we have everyone's favourite, Sean Gladwell. Further enabling the kind of research that Storylines has just completed will be one of the goals of our 2010 infrastructure development. When it came to assessing their findings, Storylines did have to do quite a bit of work outside of the DAAO system. So we want to give users more flexibility in how they group and analyse their data. It was always envisaged that this next stage of development would expand the potential for researchers to draw on the system's mined content and reveal statistics and patterns in the content. Also, as part of this year's developments, we'll be looking at interoperability with other like datasets in order to aid content growth. And we'll be expanding the schema to provide more contextual information and looking at ways to make the site more visual so we're not constantly jumping out of the site. Digital publishing will enable us to exploit new technologies and continue to address the research needs of Australian art historians. But central to all of this is the content. So in finishing, I'm just going to pinch Joan Kerr's words again. In her introduction to the DAAO, she acknowledges the work of those that contributed to that publication. And I'm slightly paraphrasing here. She says, what they have done is to open up a vast, unexplored treasure trove, which should keep researchers, academics, curators, artists, dealers, historians busy for years. I trust that all will automatically report their inevitable discoveries, divergences and disillusionments to the Dictionary of Australian Artists project so that we can continue to refine the load. So stay tuned and do contribute.